You're listening to the Nourish Child Podcast, episode number 59.
Welcome to the Nourish Child Podcast, a show about childhood nutrition, feeding kids, and dealing with the ups and downs of growing a healthy child. Here's your host, registered dietitian and childhood nutrition expert, Jill Castle.
Hey there, welcome to the Nourish Child Podcast. I'm Jill Castle, your host, and you've tuned into a show about childhood nutrition, feeding kids, and dealing with the ups and downs of raising healthy ones inside and out. I also own a business called Jill Castle Nutrition, which collectively encompasses my private practice, company and organizational consulting endeavors, speaking engagements, and parent programs. So for those of you who are familiar with me, you know last year I was able to speak on the TEDx stage. I created and launched 2 new programs for parents called Eat Like a Champion, which is a sports nutrition program for teens and their parents to learn how to fuel their bodies for sport. And I also created and beta tested the ADHD diet for kids. And that was a lot of fun. And I'm currently in the process of updating some additional materials and content for that course and planning a launch of that course right around the start of school. So if that's something that you're interested in, pretty soon I will have a priority opt-in list available for you to add yourself to so that you are in the know when that course is available for purchase. And then I just recently relaunched my updated and revised course and program called the Nourish Child Project. If you weren't able to jump into this group program recently, I will be thinking about a way I can make it available to you in 2019. This year, I also started a 6-month business and thought leadership mastermind program for pediatric nutrition professionals, and I am happy to say my group will be coming to Connecticut tomorrow to experience a hands-on, interactive, and relaxing retreat, led by me, yours truly. I can't wait to meet them all in person. We've been working together over the last 5 months, and this is a really fun way to really take it up to another level. I will be offering this program Thrive in the fall for a whole new group, so get on my priority list if you think this is just what you need to fast-track your nutrition business, particularly in relation to pediatric nutrition. I'll include a link in the show notes to the priority opt-in for that program. So today I am talking about myths, nutrition myths surrounding young athletes specifically, and what they need to perform well in their sport. So if you have an athlete, big or small, recreational or elite, stay tuned for some of the biggest nutrition myths circulating the world of youth sports and nutrition, and my attempt to demystify them and set the record straight. You can find today's show notes with all the links I mentioned over at jillcastle.com/059. That's 059 for episode number 59. And if you appreciate nutrition as a secret weapon for athletic performance in young athletes, I want you to do a few things. Number 1, share this episode on your Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram pages so more parents can find it and listen to it. And number 2, subscribe to the Nourish Child Podcast in Apple Podcasts or whatever app you use to listen to this show. This will pull the Nourish Child up in rankings and make it way easier for other parents, teachers, healthcare providers, and other people to find the show. This episode of the Nourish Child Podcast is brought to you by Eat Like a Champion, the sports nutrition course for young athletes. What a young athlete eats, when they eat, and how they fuel their body can be the secret sauce to their success. Yet so many young athletes don't know how to fuel for performance. My sports nutrition course changes all of that. When young athletes take this course, they learn the fundamentals of fueling with food, from the role of protein and carbs and where to find them in food, to the timing of eating for training and competition, and much more. I've helped many young athletes take their athletic performance to the next level by coaching them through the foundation of a performance diet. You can find out more at www.jillcastle.com/courses. Okay, let's get into the show. I want to tell you a little story. My son recently, who's a rower, went to his regional championship in Worcester, Massachusetts, and he's a lightweight rower. So one of the big things that happens with lightweight rowers when they get to this sort of elite level of rowing, in competition, they have to make a certain weight. So they have to weigh in the day of competition, and they have to be at a certain level. And for high schools, it's 150 pounds. And they have to make weight. They have to be 150 or below, not 0.1 over or 0.2 over or 2 or 3 pounds over. They've got to be spot on or below. And you can imagine the amount of stress and anxiety this can cause some of the athletes. And from that, it can cause a lot of wacky ways of trying to make weight. So one of the things that, I've been talking with some of our athletes with is not leaving nutrition to the last minute. And I think that's a good theme for all young athletes because it is such a important part of any type of athletic performance. Whether you have to make weight or not, that is the fuel, that's the gasoline, that's what you put in your tank, your body, to make it go and make it endure, make it last when you're competing or even just when you're training. We also, over the weekend, had an interesting conversation. And, as a nutrition professional, whenever topics of nutrition come up, and they seem to come up around me quite a bit, when they do come up, my ears always perk up and I'm always listening to sort of what's on the street, what people are thinking and saying and believing. And one of the topics that came up was this idea of fat versus carbohydrate as a fuel source. And, there has been some research in the adult arena about fat as a fuel source. And we do know that young children preferentially do use fat as a fuel source more efficiently than they do carbohydrate. But as you get older and more mature, the shift to using carbohydrate as the primary fuel source starts to happen. And one of the topics or one of the questions was, what do I think about, this whole idea of fat as the primary fuel source? And my response is always, sort of measured in and cloaked in the idea that children and young teen athletes are different from adults. So when we're looking at research that's based in adults, we might be able to start to think about how that could apply to a teenager, an older teenager. But we have to be very careful about how we apply those research studies to growing children, middle school children, and early adolescents, because a lot of that is not going to apply to them. And so, while there are individual body compositions and level of maturity, there is, in general, a lack of research in young athletes compared to adults. So I think it's important to make sure that you're looking for research-based or science-based information when it comes to young athletes. I've included a lot of that in my book, Eat Like a Champion, in my writings on my blog, here on the podcast. But it is something that can be quite confusing for parents and for their athletes. So I just wanted to bring that up because it is something that's coming up in conversation. Whenever I speak with parents, and even sometimes when I'm speaking with coaches about nutrition for young athletes, I do notice there's a lot of misinformation circling around today, and I want to address some of that. As a writer in the past for USA Swimming and US Rowing, US Field Hockey, and even Golf Magazine, I've heard a lot of myths and misconceptions around fueling young athletes. And one thing I know for sure, when there's misinformation circulating, oftentimes mistakes can be made. For example, dieting before a competition. That's that's just really bad before you're competing to start losing tons of weight and dehydrating your body and potentially even losing muscle mass. That doesn't have good outcomes for an athlete's performance. Another one is avoiding carbohydrate foods, or loading up on protein, thinking that's the end-all be-all nutrient and that you need tons of it to do well in your sport. Another one is skipping meals. Again, that could be because you're trying to make weight. Could be because you think that your body needs to be quote unquote empty to feel good and run a race or row or swim or play a soccer game. The other mistake can be overeating after your training. Like you don't eat enough all day long, you go and you train, and as a result of not eating enough, you come back so depleted and so hungry and starving that your eating becomes out of control. So today, what I want to do on this show is to demystify some of the most common things that I'm hearing, and I'm sure I don't hear everything, but I do want to sort of highlight some of the most common things I do hear about sports nutrition as it applies to young athletes. So I'm going to go through 5 different nutrition myths and try to demystify them. Okay, so we are talking about 5 nutrition myths for young athletes, and we are going to debunk or demystify them. So myth number 1 is, get ready, athletes don't have to worry about food quality. So, all sports aren't created equal. Some sports are very light in their physical activity and their energy burn. Things like baseball, for example. And other sports are really high calorie burning sports like swimming or running. The best athletes understand that the sweet spot is not just being purely quality associated or quantity associated. They understand that you have to pay attention to quantity and quality of food when it comes to a sports diet. So you absolutely have to worry about food quality. Think about it. I mean, if you're eating too many sweets, we already know teenagers consume about 34 teaspoons of sugar, added sugar per day on average. If you're eating way too many sweets in your diet, I know as a nutrition professional, that you're probably missing out on some key nutrients because lots of desserts and sweets and treats, they don't have a lot of nutrition in them. They have a lot of sugar and a lot of calories and possibly a lot of fat, but they don't have a lot of nutrients. And we know that nutrients help the body's metabolism, or that engine, run efficiently. And so nutrients are really important in your food. We also know that when food contains a lot of sugar, an athletic body will burn through that sugar pretty quickly and may not experience that lasting endurance that other types of foods will provide. When you eat a lot of sugar and you go out and you try to run 5 miles, for example, at some point on that run, you're probably going to bonk or hit the wall. You run out of that fuel that you need. The other thing with sweets is that they're really good at spiking your blood sugar up, meaning you're going to get that instant feeling great feeling and feeling that energy right away. But that doesn't last, and that blood sugar can drop and you can feel really lethargic and tired and even moody and angry when you have that blood sugar drop. So part of this idea of not having to worry about food quality just because you're an athlete and you're burning everything off is just not true. It's simply not true. We also know that really high fat foods, things like French fries or chips that are fried, they can slow down performance because fat is really slow to digest. When you compare it to other nutrients like carbohydrate, fat is just a slower nutrient for the stomach and the digestive system to break down. And as a result, you can feel really full after eating a bunch of fatty foods. So, yes, too much sugar, not enough nutrients. Too much fat can make you feel sluggish and full and really affect your performance. So, yeah, athletes have to worry about food quality. They absolutely do. What I like to teach athletes to do is to make a balanced plate. So that means including foods like fruits and vegetables, grains, preferably whole grains. And I'm going to talk about that in my second myth for you. protein sources, dairy sources like milk and cheese and yogurt. And if you're not a dairy person, then finding substitutes that are going to give you that combination of protein, calcium, vitamin D, and other nutrients which are included in those foods. Now, if you're sitting here thinking, I cannot get my child to eat vegetables or to eat any whole grains, no way is he eating beans. Well, what I would have to say to you is what I would say to the athletes that I work with, and what was so well stated in episode number 40 with Dan Walsh, who is a U.S. rowing coach and also a former Olympian. And that is, you need to train your palate, just like you train your body. I'll include that show note so you can hear that show note link so you can hear what he has to say about it. But he's pretty firm about, if you don't like vegetables, well, you still need to eat them, and you need to train your palate to like them and enjoy them because they are part of a sports nutrition diet. We know if you have a better balanced plate, you are going to get more nutrients. And again, as I mentioned earlier, nutrients helps the body efficiently use the energy it's consuming. So nutrients are important too. I devote a whole chapter in Eat Like a Champion on the role of nutrients in sports nutrition. So what I can tell you is that time and time again, I have revamped athletes' diets to make their plates more balanced, their eating and timing of eating better framed, and they come back saying they feel better, they're performing better, they're lasting longer on the field, they're feeling stronger, they're sharper. And I think one of the best things is they're enjoying their nutrition more. So what does the science say? In terms of this first myth, athletes don't have to worry about food quality. Just to sum it up, the science says meals and snacks filled with unhealthy foods like sweets, fried food, and other processed foods won't give the growing athlete the foundation to perform well or even establish healthy eating for years later. And according to some recent research, poor eating can contribute to unhealthy excess body fat and weight gain, even in young athletes. Okay, myth number 2. Carbs are B-A-D, bad. The diet culture tells us carbs are bad, bread is bad, pasta is bad, rice is bad. Not so for growing children and especially young growing athletes. So let's break down what carbs are just really quick. I like to say they're simple and they're complex, or for even easier understanding, they're fast or they're slow. So simple carbs are fast. They top off the tank. They give you that quick energy burst because they're quickly absorbed and used by the body. We even see some absorption of simple carbs in the mouth. So generally, you can eat these about 30 minutes before a competition, and you can even eat them or use them during a competition. The amount, the volume that you're consuming really sort of dictates how well you will tolerate them. So, for example, Gatorade, a sports drink, or Cliff Bar blocks, or those Gatorade chews. Those are just pure, simple carbohydrate with a few electrolytes in them that help you top off your tank. Dried fruit, half a banana, a couple of crackers, they can do the same thing. Complex carbs, or what I call slow carbs, are slower to break down in your digestive system. They break down slow in the body, release sugar slowly and gradually into the bloodstream, and help muscles load up with a lasting source of fuel called glycogen. So, to keep it pretty simple, muscles love carbohydrates. It's their preferred energy source. And we do know that the more elite a young athlete is, and what I mean by that is, if you're a teenage athlete who's practicing 5 or 6 times a week for a couple hours at a time, that's an elite athlete. You're using your body every single day to play your sport for the most part. We know those athletes are really efficient at using carbohydrates and turning them into glycogen for storage in the muscle. And this glycogen storage, this store of carbohydrate in the muscle, is the powerhouse of exercise, especially if it's intense and enduring activity. So think about it. If you burn through the fast-burning carbs quickly, your body needs to tap into another source of energy, and that's going to be that glycogen that's stored in your muscle. So it's important to include those slow carbs or those complex carbs I've been talking about. So straight up carbs or even starchy carbs are a good fuel source for the young athlete. So here are some ideas for you to think about when you're planning meals and snacks for your athlete. A sweet potato, that's a great source of carbohydrate for the young athlete. Regular potatoes, also a great form of carbohydrate. I used to feed my swimmer an afternoon snack of a baked potato or a sweet potato before she went to practice. It worked great for her. I've had other elite swimmers that I've coached who don't like potatoes, so we do, but love corn and peas. Those are starchy vegetables that work really well pre-practice. Rice, quinoa, pasta, beans and lentils. These are all sources of powerhouse carbs that you can start to work into meals and snacks as a source of energy for the muscles. There are lots of different carbohydrate-rich foods that athletes can include in their diet. Try whole grain breads, cornbread, shredded wheat cereal, corn flakes, pretzels, bagels, English muffins, oatmeal, fruit. Milk and vegetables are also sources of carbohydrate in the diet. Milk has protein in it as well, and some vegetables have protein. So you can see that carbs are not bad for young, growing athletes. And if you're a parent who avoids carbs, be really careful of the messages you're sending to your children, because it's, young, growing children, young athletes, they need to learn how to balance all foods in their diet, and eliminating carbohydrate, particularly during an active season where they're training a lot and or competing a lot, can really compromise their athletic performance. So what does the science say about carbs? For young athletes, a consistently high carbohydrate diet, day in and day out, provides a consistent and reliable fuel source the growing athlete needs. I love networking. I'm part of a podcast network called Parents on Demand, or the Pod Network. We are a network of fun and educational podcasts perfect for your family. You can explore the shows in the network by going to parentsondemand.com and searching specific categories. Parents on Demand also has a download for a free network app on iOS and Android, so you can listen to your favorite shows or find new podcasts. Subscribe through iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music, iHeartRadio, or another provider. Every month, I will feature a podcast that I think will be helpful or of interest to you. Here's this month's podcast feature.
So, you've made it through the first year with your kiddo, and life is crazy. You need Parent Savers, an audio podcast providing new moms and dads with the practical information to help preserve their sanity. With the help of our experts, parents of toddlers get the superhero strength they need to tackle the world and the next dirty diaper. Parent Savers is part of the Parents on Demand network. Look for our free network app in Apple and Android to discover more great parenting shows and listen to your favorite episodes on the go.
Okay, so just to recap, myth number 1 was that athletes don't have to worry about food quality. Myth number 2, carbohydrates are bad. Myth number 3 is all about protein. Athletes need more protein. True. This is true in part. Studies in young athletes show there is an increased need for protein compared to non-athletes. And that's because athletes are building more muscle during exercise, and they need a bit more protein for the muscle repair work that occurs after exercise. But this belief that athletes need more protein has spawned an age of protein powders and high-protein bars, and unfortunately, some athletes who get overly aggressive with protein. Is it needed? Well, I believe you only need what you need. Nothing more, nothing less. While more research is emerging in the field of youth sports nutrition, we need more information about protein to justify or debunk this idea that more is better. I'm not really sure it is. I've seen female athletes who really try to up their protein using powders and bars, and they end up gaining a lot of extra weight that they can't understand why they gained. Part of it is because when we eat too much of anything, our body turns it into fat and will store it. And that can happen with protein too. Here's what the science says. Most young athletes get plenty of protein in their diet from the food that they eat. In fact, studies show that most young athletes eat 2 to 3 times more protein than they actually need, and they don't even realize they're eating that much protein, and they're not trying to eat more protein. So you can see without even trying, athletes are getting plenty of protein. The caveat to that is if athletes who diet or even follow a vegan diet that is not conscious of protein intake, they may fall short on good protein sources. So if you have a teen or a young athlete who's dieting or who is strictly vegan, you want to take a look at the protein sources in their diet and make sure they're good ones. Myth number 4, dehydration causes cramps. So oftentimes when athletes are riddled with cramps, we think, oh, they must be dehydrated. But there's a researcher out there that's proposing that there's something different going on. So I want to talk to you about that a little bit. Research, though, in general has been slim in proving that dehydration and electrolyte abnormalities are the root cause of muscle cramps. This is partly due to the fact that muscle cramps are spontaneous and oftentimes they're unpredictable. So they're really hard to study in a lab setting because it's difficult to reenact the situation and actually even cause a muscle cramp to be able to tell why it's happening. One researcher, Kevin C. Miller is his name, he proposes neuromuscular fatigue or muscle exhaustion as a theory for why muscle cramps occur in athletes. Neuromuscular fatigue or muscle exhaustion stems from overuse of the muscles coupled with inadequate rest. So when a muscle is extremely tired, mechanisms within the muscle start to misfire. So those small nerves that should be keeping the muscle from overcontracting, they might malfunction and cause the muscle to cramp. So, what does all this mean? Well, the science says adequate hydration is absolutely critical to any young athlete's performance, but there are other things your athlete can do to avoid cramps, such as regularly stretching. You can adjust the training intensity if your athlete is having repetitive cramping when exercising. It might be worth it to look at the intensity of training and downgrade a little bit and see if that helps with cramping. Eating more fruit and salty foods for that benefit of adding more potassium and salt to the diet, and even trying pickle juice. It has been demonstrated to quickly reverse cramps in some athletes. So trying pickle juice means drinking it. So if you can get your athlete to do that, it might work for them, and it certainly won't harm them to try to see if that could work. Okay, just a quick recap. Myth number 1, we're coming into the last myth here. Myth number 1, athletes don't have to worry about food quality. The science says meals and snacks filled with unhealthy foods like sweets, fried food, and other processed foods won't give the growing athlete the foundation to perform well or eat healthy for years later. Myth number 2, carbs are bad. Well, the science says a consistently high carbohydrate diet, day in and day out, provides the consistent and reliable fuel source the growing athlete needs. Myth number 3, athletes need more protein. The science says most young athletes get plenty of protein without thinking about it, just from the diet of food that they eat. That translates to they don't need extra powders, bars, and shakes, most likely. Myth number 4, dehydration causes cramps. The science says, yes, all of our athletes need to be well hydrated, but that might not be the reason your athlete is plagued with cramping. Try stretching, adjusting the training schedule, eating more fruit and salty foods, and even trying pickle juice. So the last myth, myth number 5, regular food isn't good enough. Or in other words, you need fancy supplements and additions to your diet to complete it. As the food industry for engineered sports foods and supplements has grown, so has the idea that regular food isn't good enough. But honestly, folks, in most cases, it is. What manufacturers cannot duplicate in food is the blend and concentrations of a variety of nutrients and how they uniquely interact in the body. Dr. Chris Rosenblum says, although bars contain added protein, vitamins, and minerals, we really have no idea how well any of those nutrients are absorbed in the body. And what we do know is with real food, you know what will get delivered to your body. She's a registered dietitian and sports nutrition specialist and a professor of nutrition at Georgia State University. I interviewed Chris on the Nourished Child podcast in episode number 51, and we talked about how to make super easy nutrition tweaks to boost performance in the teen athlete. So the science says about this whole regular food isn't good enough. It says this: there is no evidence that suggests better sports performance in children and teens when extra vitamins, minerals, and other nutrients are added to the diet in the form of multivitamins or single nutrients, taken alone or engineered in food. Anchor the sports diet in real food, folks. It's more satisfying, tasting, nutritious, and a proven energy and nutrient delivery system that works. So, there you have it. 5 different common myths that are circulating about sports nutrition in young athletes. I'm curious, what are you hearing? Are you hearing myths or statements about sports nutrition for your young athlete that has you scratching your head wondering, is this real or is this an urban myth? Let me know. Shoot them over to me at jill@jillcastle.com, my email address. Let me know what you're hearing, and maybe we can address it in another show. Thank you for listening today. I'm Jill Castle, and the purpose of this podcast is to help you nourish your child, no matter whether he's an athlete or not. You can find the show notes for today over at jillcastle.com/059. That's 059 for episode number 59. And I invite you to join my Facebook page, The Nourished Child. Subscribe to my Monday morning newsletter and subscribe to this show so you get a notification every time I release a new one. If you know you can do better by your athlete, check out Eat Like a Champion, my online program for teens and their parents. It walks you through the essential nutrition you need to cultivate the best performance you can for your athlete. I'm so glad to connect with you today. Please be sure to give the athlete in your life, big or small, a loving squeeze today. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to the Nourished Child podcast, where the #1 goal is to help you grow a nourished child inside and out.